For those of you who have not been to a showcase before, you might be asking yourself, what's happening right now? The KSU Tellers is a storytelling troupe that is housed in the Department of Theater and Performance Studies here at KSU. They do all kinds of variety of things, and one of the things that they do is undergraduate research projects. This next piece was developed as an undergraduate research project by Courtney Earl, who is a double major in philosophy and theater performance studies, and I think you'll see how that plays in this story by Courtney Earl.
I was confused, but also impressed, because Greek life seemed to have gotten really, really Greek. And I thought this because I am a philosophy major. And so when he asked me what's good, I was immediately transported into the world of the man who most famously posed that question, Socrates. He went all throughout Athens trying to find an answer to this seemingly simple question. What's good? And he would do so by means of the Maieutic method. For those of you who don't speak Greek, the midwife method, more commonly referred to today as the Socratic method. And the Socratic method works like this. You ask a seemingly simple question, like what's good. You wait for a response. You ask a question about the response, and then a question about that response, and a question about that response, and 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 that response, until the person being asked just gives birth to what they already knew. Or just feels really stupid and angry and wants to get away from Socrates. And this was fine. The first couple hundred times Socrates asked. The next couple hundred times, the people of Athens started getting a little annoyed. Because Socrates wasn't just asking anybody. He was asking everybody. Sailors, artisans, athletes, poets, politicians, no one could get away. But they all let it go. Because being annoying is not a crime in Athens. And Socrates was very careful to uphold all of Athens' laws because he upheld them above all else, including life itself. In fact, the only people in Athens that did not find Socrates annoying were the pretty young rich boys who could afford not to work. They had lived an entire life of privilege. No matter what stupid thoughts came out of their head, no matter how super dumb, all they ever heard was yes. And the rich boys thought that they knew a lot because their fathers had paid for them to get a fancy-smancy education from the Pythagoreans. Yes, the people who brought you the Pythagorean theorem taught the rich boys everything they thought they knew. But then, something incredible happened. They met Socrates, and he listened while they spouted off all their incredibly stupid thoughts, and said, "No. Oh, my Apollo, no. You are so wrong. In fact, I've prepared a scroll detailing all the ways in which you are wrong, and I will go through them with you one by one so you can marinate in your wrongness." And by the time they got to the end of that list, the rich boys felt so stupid and humiliated that they just fell in love with him immediately. No one had ever had the guts to do this to them before. No one had ever told them they were wrong. And it hurt so good. They would do anything to get them some more of that. And Socrates realized he had struck gold. These boys were willing to buy him all the wine he could drink, host all his parties, sleep with him sometimes, and were enthralled by every word he said. And all he had to do to keep it going was make their emotional well-being totally dependent on whether or not they could gain his personal approval. Amazing. Plato writes that Socrates was like a satyr, but satyrs need instruments to seduce their lovers. Socrates needed only his words. And by this point, he had a large following of attractive young Greek boys and got a little arrogant. He started choosing boys from the group to accompany him for a little private discourse. And they would propound philosophy long into the night, and sometimes again in the morning. And this would go on until the boys started seeing a real future for themselves in philosophy, and having visions of propounding philosophy into the sunset with Socrates and living happily ever after. And when they started getting attached like this, Socrates tossed him, got a new one, did the same thing over. This happened first with Aristophanes, who was dumped for Charmides, who was replaced by Euthydemus, who was tossed for Alcibiades, who got too clingy, so we moved on to Agathon. And by the time we get to Agathon, we have a long line of broken hearts, and Alcibiades, second to last on the list, for those of you who aren't counting, was not having it. He had watched all his friends get their hearts broken in the exact same way, by the same man, over and over and over again. And besides that, he was also, better than all of them, and way worthier of Socrates' love. And he intended to prove it. So he concocted a plan both to expose Socrates for the scum he was, and to, impress him with his ability to take initiative. And like all good plans, it started with Alcibiades getting really, really, really drunk. And he stormed Agathon's house, where a party was being held for Socrates and all his fanboys, and burst into the foyer and started making a belligerent, drunken clatter, and then wandered to where the party actually was, and went right up to Socrates, and said, "He has deceived us all. He presents himself as your lover, and before you know it, you're in love with him. And he gives you the greatest philosophy of your entire life." And then he just doesn't call in the morning. What is that? Agathon? Agathon. Do not be deceived. Learn from my mistakes. He is just using you like he's used all the rest of us. I love you, Socrates. A hush fell over the room, and the fanboys started considering what he'd said. Because even though Alcibiades was blind drunk, he was also kind of right. But before anyone could form full opinions on what had just happened, Socrates broke the silence. Ha! And he put his arm around Agathon and looked at him with big philosophical eyes. And said, "Isn't it funny how far some people will go to get between us?" And Agathon looked back and said, "Yeah, it is." And he looked at all the other boys in the room and said, "Isn't it funny, guys?" And they all started nervously laughing, which eventually evolved into a roaring guffaw. And Alcibiades stood in the middle of it and realized he'd failed. Alcibiades did what all rich boys do when they fail. He went home and cried to Daddy. And Alcibiades was the son of a respected politician in Athens. And he had plans for his son to join the army of Athens, become a general, and, contribute to society. And now his son was a sobbing pile who had no discernible aspirations outside of propounding philosophy, whatever that meant, with Socrates. Something needed to be done. So he gathered up his politician friends, whose sons had also recently become useless. And the politician dads, the dadticians, got together and came up with a plan to get rid of Socrates for good. All right, what laws has he broken? Well, he's definitely corrupted the youth. We can't kill him for that. True. All right, well, the boys seem to worship the ground he walks on. I got it. He's invented gods that are not the gods of Athens. Sounds like a death sentence to me. Good work, boys. A dadtician from the back piped up. We don't really have any proof. Proof is for plebeians. We don't need proof. And they called Socrates to trial, which surprised him because he didn't remember breaking any laws because he upheld the laws of Athens above all else, including life itself. But he was sure that Athens would see him through, just as she always had, and strode confidently into the Lyceum. And the dadticians looked down upon him and said, "Socrates, you are on trial for corrupting the youth." He gestured to the sobbing fanboys in the stands. "And inventing gods that are not the gods of Athens. Socrates thought about that for a moment, and through a very elegant, lengthy, well-thought-out discourse that we simply do not have time for, he basically said, "I didn't do that." And the dietitians replied, "You are sentenced to death by hemlock poisoning. Enjoy your time in prison until the hour of parting. Bye-bye." Socrates went to prison. Athens had failed him. But it wasn't long before his fanboys came to his rescue because they were still very rich. And it was incredibly easy to just bribe the guards and get to Socrates' cell. He could have been in and out of Athens that night. But Socrates refused to go. Because for Socrates, to violate the law of Athens, to live in exile of her, was a fate worse than death. And this is why Socrates is heralded as the founder of Western philosophy. Because his convictions in his philosophy were so strong, he was willing to die for them, and did. But I think that it is just as important to remember he didn't have that pedestal we've placed him on in history when he was in Athens. And he treated the people who loved him enough to make him immortal like trash. I think we honor Socrates more when we throw that pedestal into question, because in his own words, the unexamined life is not worth living.